Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Prison Breaking with Sarah and Paul. I am Paul.
And I'm Sarah. And today's insane nail-biter of a cliff-hanging adrenaline rush is titled simply Go, possibly because that's what we were all shouting at the screen as we watch it. And it was also written by today's guest. Paul, do you want to tell the people who we're going to talk with today?
We get to talk to Mr. Matt Olmstead, who is an extraordinary writer who became the showrunner from seasons 2 to 4. We're going to skip a bunch of our banter today because we have so much. We've been, since episode 1, basically, we've been saying we need to ask Olmstead about that. We need to ask Olmstead about that. And now we finally have him. So let's just get right into the Adelstein Index, and we'll get all the Olmstead time we can.
Outstanding. Okay, Adelstein Index Go premiered on May 8th, 2006, putting it, I believe, in May Sweeps territory. We can talk about what that was later. It was written, as we mentioned, by the great Matt Olmstead, directed by Dean White. It drew 9.13 million viewers. And before you think you know the competition in the time slot by now, also in our Monday at 8 p.m. slot this week was David Blaine Drowned Alive on
Wow.
ABC. How about that? Something different. Probably better than Wife Swap Drowned Alive, the crossover that theoretically nobody wants to see. And then, of course, also on CBS was King of Queens and Deal or No Deal on NBC.
The recap of the episode reads, Michael forces Pope to transfer Lincoln to the infirmary and then locks Pope in the closet. The team secures Bellick and Michael puts on Bellick's uniform. The others wear bleached white clothes so they can get into the psych ward. Haywire joins the escape, and we discover Sarah left the infirmary door unlocked. She did it. Westmoreland, sadly, dies in escape, first telling Michael where to find the $5, not $1 million on the outside. The other escapees over here, but not all of them manage to get out of Fox River. Nick Savrinn releases Veronica, and Abruzzi's thugs kill him. The company plans to kill Vice President Reynolds, and Pope is found at last and triggers the alarm.
Basically, everybody dies. Some other things happening in the world and pop culture around this time of May 8th, 2006. On May 9th, it was the finale of the very first season of The Real Housewives of Orange County. And the success of that season led to a massive franchise of Real Housewives spinoffs, not one of which I've ever seen, unfortunately. Or maybe fortunately. May 6th was the 132nd running of the Kentucky Derby, won by the undefeated colt Barbaro. The dramatic victory was later marred by a career-ending injury, becoming a tale of triumph and tragedy, much like this episode. On May 5th, Mission Impossible 3 hit theaters, directed by J.J. Abrams, starring Tom Cruise and the late, great Philip Seymour Hoffman, who, coincidentally, Paul and I both decided last week would be on our dream list of actors living or dead to work with. That film made $47.7 million on opening day.
And I would argue is still, even though I love all those movies, the best one.
Yeah.
On May 2nd,
Can't beat Phil Hoffman.
Yeah, no, as a villain. On May 2nd, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that Anna Nicole Smith could continue her fight to claim a large part of her late husband's vast business holdings, estimated to be worth $1.6 billion. That story again, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on a case involving Anna Nicole Smith's love life. And in even weirder news, on May 4th, U.S. Representative Patrick J. Kennedy said he was under the influence of medication when he crashed his Mustang convertible into a traffic barrier 2 blocks from the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., which, yes, is one of the opening scenes of, I think, the West Wing pilot, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, the Sorkin pilot.
Okay.
And with that, here are the highlights from our watch party, which, of course, you can access by subscribing on Patreon on our show page, wherever you're listening right now. Ready? Let's go. Get it?
Aha, yes.
You see what I did there? Yeah, this is why I don't write comedy. World, many of the things that we put up are put up with duct tape. I apologize for thinking that was a gaffe. The gaffe, as it turns out, is mine. This is a shot of just like every butt in our cast. That's beautiful. And that's just me trying to stay warm and stay alive there. That's not acting, that actually might have even been before they called action. I think this is probably a decision to save a brilliant actor and make sure that he comes back for next season, which is, I'm grateful for. I wonder if there was a conversation about keeping them in prison for season 2. I love the moment during this escape where they all go, oh my God, this guy is certifiable and because he's crazy like a Fox River 8.
There's a lot to talk about there. We'll be right back with writer and showrunner Matt Olmstead, folks.
Welcome back, everyone. Our guest today has been writing for television for 250 years. That's an exaggeration, but he has been on massive franchises like the Law & Order universe, the Chicago Med PD Fire Justice universe. He's created shows like Breakout Kings and Blind Justice. He wrote 13 episodes of Prison Break and 35 episodes of one of my all-time favorite shows, NYPD Blue. Matt Olmstead, welcome.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Hi, good to see you.
And you as well.
It's very exciting for us. We are ostensibly here to talk about episode 21, Go, which you wrote, but also as you were overseeing the room from then into perpetuity, we have so much stuff that we want to talk to you about. So we're going to try to stay on topic, but I imagine this is going to be a wide-ranging and circuitous discussion, which we're excited about.
Well, I can tell you off the top that it's one of my favorite memories of all time, working-wise. And I know you guys were in the production side, actor side. We were the writer's room. And it was just the best writer's room, best talent. They've all gone on to do great things. There's a very, very special place in my heart, Prison Break, for sure. The whole experience.
That's great.
Karen Usher said the same thing.
Yeah, we had Karen on as a guest. She was our first writer guest, and she was saying what a special group it was. And, I think one of the things that is testament to that is so many writers made it through the entire run of that show. I mean, that's pretty rare that a writer's room has such little turnover in 4 seasons, right? I mean,
yeah, I think we maybe lost a couple and brought in 2 or 3. We promoted 2 writers within who were assistants. Seth Hoffman, Clinda Vasquez, and a very, very tight group. But just heavy hitters that you just don't know when you staff a show who's gonna. I've been on shows where it's kind of a bloodbath by the end of the first season, unfortunately.
Sure.
Right. Sorry, how did you come to the show? How did you start with us?
I'd come off of NYPD Blue. I'd been there for 7 years and did a couple pilots with Steven Bochco. And so I was kind of a free agent, and I took some meetings and saw the pilot. We liked it. Met with Paul Schering, who created it, and Dawn Parouse, who would later become my wife, Dawn Olmstead, and she was from the very beginning. So I came on after the pilot was shot, and Paul Schering didn't have any television experience. Not that maybe you needed. Back then it was really important. And so they wanted to kind of bring in some experienced television people. So I came in, and a guy named Mike Pavone also came in as EP, kind of co-showrunners.
We were, sorry, go ahead.
And then when, as you know, it's hectic making a pilot, but once a pilot's picked up the series, it resembles Squid Game a little bit in terms of so many people are weighing in, people are flying out in, you have to survive it, you have to negotiate it, you have to always, and then we got to a point where the material came in at the right time that they liked, and then everything kind of calmed down, but it was pretty hectic early when I got it.
We were talking about, how, especially in those days, a pilot had huge budgets, Brett Ratner, big DP, and that the second episode then is trying to meet that level for a third of the price in a third of the time, usually.
Right.
And we talked about that on a production level and a directorial level, but in a storytelling way, you are tasked with a similar challenge. I know Michael Cudlitz was telling us, who played C.O. Bob, we had him on, that originally this was when Schering wrote it, that there was a 6-episode standalone for Fox that they then decided to turn into an entire series.
Right.
Do you remember that piece of material and saying, "Oh, okay, well, this is 12 episodes. We can expand this into. Or we can take it to 22." It was one of the questions we had for Karen. How much of this stuff was planted in the pilot? How much of it was, okay, Matt Olmstead comes in, it's like, here's what we have in the pilot. How are we going to unwind this into 22, let alone 2 seasons, 4 seasons?
Yeah. So I was brought in when they wanted 22 out of it.
Okay.
And I remember when I met with Paul Schering, his pitch was the first season is the first half of The Great Escape, and the second season is the second half of The Great Escape, which we kind of held true to.
Yeah.
But beyond that, in terms of the moves, he had a couple ideas of like the Allen wrench move on the toilet early on and a couple other things. But literally, once the staff was assembled and we're there, it's kind of like, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
But I always look back on that show and on our side of the creative side, it succeeded because of the staff.
Mhm.
And I've been on shows subsequently that are more just standalone episodes.
Yeah.
And so you have a little bit of the writer's room, but people peel off and do their own thing, and you can kind of move things around. But that show was so dense, and we were just chewing through story that we all had to be in the same room. So we were in the same room, 10 o'clock to 6 o'clock.
Wow.
And just because of the sensibilities and the talent of all these people who, as you point out, were there for most, for the run, 4-year run,
Mhm.
that's where we got all the material from. There's no way that show succeeds if we had a different staff. There's no way.
Speaking of the density of storytelling, um, which is kind of much more common now, frankly. I mean,
Yeah.
the number of twists and turns per act, it seems like there's 4 episodes in one. Was that the pilot doesn't quite feel that way. The pilot has more of a traditional television arc to it. Was that I mean, obviously it must have been a conscious decision, but where did that intensity come from? Where did we're gonna we're gonna crank this thing up to 11 and keep it there constantly? Was that from the get-go? Was that a group discussion? Where did that come from?
Yeah. It's funny. Initially, there were the first kind of 3 episodes that were written and turned in, maybe on the outline stage, and the studio and network, who were both super supportive of the show and were for the whole duration of the show. And
Mhm.
sometimes you can find that,
Mhm.
but they were on it. And this is the Squid Game part I'm talking about, where it was, this is getting tossed, this is getting tossed. I think it was Dana Walden, who was at the time the head of 20th, who's now
Mhm.
over ABC, who was like, well, shouldn't there be a riot up here? And so they were pushing
Mm.
for higher stakes stuff. So we had those notes that we knew we had to absorb and kind of execute, but also each writer was assigned a script early on in the first roster. So it was 1 through 6 or 7 was each writer. And so each writer going into it, just out of their own pride and competitive spirit, was like, I have to
Ah,
wing it.
right.
And
Ah,
I have to show
Mhm.
everybody that I have what it takes, and I'm
I'm
going
here
to
to
like set a
play.
standard. And so you saw these scripts coming in early that were just crazy. And then that kind of like launched us. And then we're like, well, we can't dip below that bar that we've set.
yeah,
But Forty was trying to like in the room, you're supporting each other. When you're writing by yourself, you're trying to show that I'm the best.
sure.
And everyone should have that attitude.
And then what happens when that script lands on the production side and someone goes, "Sorry, so we're gonna riot, we're gonna cut a guy's toe off.
Right.
We're gonna," like, was there a moment where you guys would deliver these insane scripts that were so amazing and the directors would be like, "Super sorry, just checking in. 8 days? 8
Yeah, right,
days.
right.
8 days?" Because
Absolutely.
Watkins was very in the beginning, I remember Watkins being very game for that kind of thing. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, he sort of still had that, like, I'm still in a combat situation serving overseas mentality. And then there was a bit of a pivot, which was interesting when Hooks came in, because Hooks is stoned. Like, I have never seen him rush, raise his
No,
Right.
voice, get
no.
upset. He is absolutely like, "Hey guys, we're going to do this. It's going to be great."
Right.
And they were very different leadership styles.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I wonder, was it partly a response to just one of the most ambitious shows on television at the time?
Yeah, I think it was. And in that mix the whole time, you had Gary Brown, who was the line
Yeah.
producer.
Mm,
He was really our go-to guy who was as ambitious as we were, and he was able to make all
mhm.
this stuff down. And he really was boots on the ground, obviously in Chicago, and knew a lot of people, and he can move things around. So there were a couple things that were pushed back, or can we redo this? But I will say, at the risk of sounding immodest, that's one of the things that I brought when I came in. There were some longer scripts, and there were some helping to kind of like make this manageable and producible. Because if you're not doing that, if you're turning in material late, as you guys know, then you're
Right.
just inviting people to come in and try and fix it for you. That's when it turns into a jumble.
By the way,
Yeah.
very small detail. I just happens to have, we're going to talk about this in a second. This is my script from Go.
Oh my gosh.
The production draft was dropped February 14th, 2006. We're recording this together right now, February 15th. This blue draft dropped February 16th, 2006. It was just a weird little, like, here we are exactly
Crazy.
18 years later having this
Oh
conversation.
my God.
Wow.
No.
Did you come to Chicago for? I don't remember. Frankly don't remember meeting you until season 2. But did you come? I didn't anyway. Did you come for this? Were you still in the room? How did that
I
go?
came out a few times. There was a personnel change in production that didn't go over well with some actors. So I was kind of looked at as the kind of a little bit of the heavy, a little bit of the hatchet man, and people who aren't here to give their side of the story, so no need to mention names. But there was some turnover, as there was on our side creatively in LA. And
No
so I
memory
had
of
to kind of
this.
come out and deal with that a little bit. So that was tough to do. It's never fun to do. But then again, so I had to kind of negotiate that, but also be present and not kind of flee from it.
Mhm.
But I was out there a lot. And that's one of the great memories about that show was how beautiful, ironically, Joliet Prison was to film in and be in.
Yeah.
Knowing that Statesville Prison, the new kind of pod prison that they built, the modern version of it. And I've been there before where I've like toured police precincts that are no longer being used because they built a modern one. You go in to see if you can film it. And people, and I probably do the same thing, but like if you're making an hourly wage, you work for the government, whatever it is, when it's over, you just grab your lunchbox and walk out. Everything's still there.
Yep.
So that all those mug shots were still there. All these
Wow.
the remnants of these lives, and plus the fact that it was built by prisoners, however many hundred years ago, in limestone quarry from nearby.
1860s, yeah.
It was, you guys spent more time than I did, but it was a beautiful, strangely enough, prison. Like when the snow would come, or even like in the summer. So that's also part of my memories when I go to Joliet. Just like a very special place to film.
So many
And
people.
so specific.
Yeah. And so many of the actors and directors that we've talked about just the challenges but benefits of actually using that physical space to shoot it before the stages were built, shooting in the yard and shooting, for a big portion of season 1, using the actual cells, using that block. And, those places have a spirit to them that definitely seeps into that show.
I remember walking into a cell block and there was, in the mesh, when we built our beds, they were slightly different, but the real ones had like a mesh that the mattress sat on. And people would put photographs of loved ones under that mattress so that they were looking up at them.
Oh.
And some of them still had them. And it immediately makes everything very tangible and very personable. And something else that we've talked about a lot is the extent that Fox kind of let us get away, by us I mean you, with a certain level of, hey, this is the death penalty. And there are references to God and Christ and Men of the Cloth, and I'm pretty sure Paul shoots a bishop in the first, 2 episodes of the pilot. I was sort of surprised because I would have thought that those things, I feel like if you were pitching a show today, that was like, we've got a guy on death row who's wrongfully accused, and at some point we're going to strap him to an electric chair and everyone's going to hate that. There would be a lot of nerves about politically what that could mean. Were you guys ever given any kind of pushback or guidance or?
No. And that was Shurim's thing. He liked the kind of the religious kind of the theme of it all that ran through it. But I watched the first half of the first season probably a couple of years ago with my daughter when she was old to watch it. And it's one of those things you're watching. There's no way you could shoot this stuff now.
Yeah.
I mean, beyond like it's kind of, there was some bold storytelling, but also like through teabag, some of the racial stuff and some of the kind of innuendo stuff. And it went unchecked because once that show launched, and it really hadn't been like a successful serialized drama since kind of Lost, I think. And a lot of people have tried prior to that, and Sense is very tough to pull off. But they had a hit and they liked the material and they really let us do our thing. But we would be in the room like, there's no way.
I
And they
mean,
would just do it. They'd
Light
film
Up
it.
That Leather Donut
There you go.
Yeah.
made it on network television.
No,
It's almost
crazy.
like we were doing it so early that we sort of got in before they locked things down.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the storytelling, you were talking about writers going off and writing their scripts and then and upping their game. In terms of let's say, arcing out the whole season, when you guys are staying, you're laying track as the train is coming onto the track, pretty much in network when you're
Right.
doing 22 episodes. How much of the reversals, twists, and turns did you did you have figured out before you actually like went to script for episode 2, 3, 4? Because there's like, for instance, back half of the season, but did you know Abruzzi was going to come back after his throat got slit? Or was that a kind of audible, this is really playing, we really love writing for this guy, let's figure out a way to get him back in? There's so many things that
Yes.
you're like, oh, I wonder if this was planted in episode 4 because it came back in episode 18, or whether they figured out in episode 12, hey, what if we went back to this thing?
We didn't plan a lot of that out. And again, kind of chewing through story, you would look back on, and we realized this show is somewhat heightened. So there's certain allowances. The original quote unquote death of Tancredi wasn't a real death of Tancredi because she came back. And did we
Like the
know?
first 2, actually.
Right. Yes, I do remember.
There's a couple.
Yeah, there were a couple. But we would just kind of on the fly. Now, it wasn't like we were only writing and hurrying, getting pages together to the set, and we were like a day in front of it all. We really had a board and we beated this stuff out. But we would like, what do we have? What seeds have we planted? What fuses have we lit unintentionally that we can revisit? Up including the late great Zach Estrin. When you were talking about season 3, he's like, it's Prison Break. You feel like you want to get him back in prison. We did the Panamanian, kind of pivot, which worked for us creatively. So it's definitely running and gunning, but running and gunning, giving yourself a month, 2 months, so a complete fire drill.
A kind of responsible running and gunning.
Very good.
Was it? I mean, because for what it's worth, I have no memories of ever going, oh my God, you guys, we're shooting tomorrow. We don't have a script.
Oh, no,
And
never.
That's to your credit, because there are a lot of shows, especially back then, that kind of worked that way. You know, there are shows where people were learning their lines in the makeup trailer because things came in hot off the presses. And we rely, I mean, look, the fact that I've got a revised full blue that's got my shooting notes in it means that we weren't shooting triple canary,
There you go.
insane revisions. But given that, one of the things that we've taught, you know, we had Silas on, who's phenomenal. And he was like, I auditioned for a 2-episode arc, and then I got to play all the way through. Like, what were the surprises as you guys got dailies and cuts going, oh, we got to get more, you know, like, we can't kill Abruzzi, he's amazing. Like, were there, because it felt sometimes like a conversation between production and the writer's room, and you guys would see what we did with what you gave us.
That's right. Actors, as you know, make their own work, or they pain in the ass
well
their
said.
way off of a job, which is a fact. Again, no one's here to defend themselves, but there were characters or actors who were a little unhappy and made it known, and those characters maybe it's a prison show. Anybody can fix, you know, and they did.
Yeah.
Not to be petulant about it or have retribution. You're just kind of like, I'm just kind of weighing, well, what's worth it for me and what's worth it for us as a staff. But we always had that available to us. But then, as you mentioned, Silas, he was in there, or even like the tweener character, it just kind of worked. And so there's plenty of track here going ahead. We were going to take it as long as we could. It's funny when people look at the seasons, and some people might think that maybe season 4 was lacking or whatever was. When they ask me about it, I'm like, I was going to work on that show with my friends in the writer's room for as long as they like. Like, hey, you want to do a 2-episode special final break? Yes, of course. Does that mean we can be in the room
Sure.
for whatever you guys want? But it was always a pleasant surprise to see a character on that show or any other show who really brings it, and it's just the right actor at the right time, the right role, and then they just make their own path.
So speaking of, just picking up on something you just mentioned, I came back, as did Paul, for season 5 without you.
Yeah.
Where were you? We missed you.
It was you.
And I mean, again, I like the way you put this, not to say anything about, people who aren't there to defend themselves, but I remember getting a script early on and it said, Jacob, sit down and have a glass of wine. And I was like, okay, so just checking, is this the beginning of a relapse? And they were like, yeah, no, good point. And changed it. And I was like, oh man, I would really love to have our original writers here, because there is this sense that we very much co-created this story. And I apologize if that feels like I'm taking more credit than deserved, but it felt to me like there was a sort of partnership between
Absolutely.
What you guys were doing and what we were trying to translate with our chattering teeth in the condemned prison. But so what happened to you in season 5? And again, we can cut this if you don't want to talk about it. But
I was in an overall deal at Universal working on the Chicago show, so I wasn't available to work on it because it was a project. And now all the writers.
So we have Dick Wolf to blame, is what you're saying.
You guys are right.
Fair enough.
Everybody was locked elsewhere, so they couldn't go over and help.
And I'm sure you've seen that there's not a reboot exactly, but a continuation of the universe.
Yes.
Is that right? And that's coming soon? Hulu?
Are you writing?
It's a reboot. And
it is a reboot. Okay.
Yeah. Dawn is an EP on it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Nice.
I haven't seen anything. I had actually pitched out a season 6 version of it with the original characters when I was at ABC, and because ABC was tied to 20th, so then there was some little bit of, I could do that. So I went there, pitched it twice, gained some traction. Then I leave ABC to come back to Universal, and there went that. So by the time everything got resurfaced or revisited, they were like, okay, well, enough time's passed. Maybe we do a reboot. So a reboot is in the works. How far along it is, I don't exactly know.
Well, but it's the same world. They're not starting over, right? It's some kind of sidequel thing.
It's the story of Manche and how he gets out of Fox River, having fallen. That would actually be amazing.
It could be.
A little quick inside baseball for people who are listening who might not fully understand. Part of what happened is Prison Break was made by, I believe, 20th Century Fox for Fox. 20th was then sold to Disney. And for a long time, I remember there being a bit of a turf war over who owns the rights to Prison Break. And so for a while, I imagine you know this, Matt, but most of us in the cast who are on social media, probably half of my feed is people going, when do we get more episodes of this show?
Oh,
I mean, it's extraordinary from all over the world.
Yep.
And there are times in the past where I've wanted to say, you guys, there is such I felt like Prison Break was the dog in the divorce. Everyone's like, I don't know what house it's going to live in. I don't know how to take care of this thing. And so for a long time, I was like, this just isn't feasible anyway, so that's, as you're talking about working for ABC, which allows you to do something with 20th, which why you could reboot it. And then, of course, there's, I think Wentworth understandably saying, I'm done playing straight characters.
Right.
Which could be a remarkable reveal where Michael and Sarah turn out to be besties who
there you go.
Found other relationships.
Wow.
But do you want to tell this story? How you met your wife on our show? Because we had divorces on our show, but as far as I know, you were... Oh, no, you were not the only marriage. Didn't Silas meet his wife on our show, too?
Yes, Silas and KK.
Silas and KK met on the show, but,
married and
I remember...
divorced.
I was going through a separation divorce, fairly, recent, told a few people. And it's funny when you go through divorce and your married friends are like, okay, be single for 2 years and tell us everything. Got it. Will do.
Sure.
Yeah. I told my then agent, he's like, Dawn's going through and we'd worked together, obviously, but never socialized or talked talked to her about it. Oh, shit. And then even though we were together for like a year, sparks, why not? Dinner, which turns into dinner. You know how it works. So I had the full intention, or my friends had the full intention. That'd be single,
Right.
carousing. I was single for
12
less than
hours.
12 hours, less than they anticipated.
I mean, she's an
I'm
extraordinary woman. She's
Yeah.
an amazing human
very
being.
lucky.
I remember because, you guys this was all happening away from set. And I remember thinking there was a typo on the call sheet. And I
Oh,
was
no,
like, you guys, it's Matt Olmstead and Dawn Parouse. And they were like, funny story. And I was like, wait, serious? I was like, the great on-set romance that always happens in season 1 was between our head writer and our executive
I know,
producers.
it didn't-
Wasn't actors.
I know
for
the
a-
actors. I
Right.
think the actors felt like, wait, this is what we're supposed to be doing.
It's supposed to be our territory.
This is set. This is location shit.
Yeah.
This isn't LA shit.
Oh, funny.
So did you guys
Yeah.
get married between seasons 1 and 2? Or
We got
2?
married right before the weekend before the last writer strike, which was, I mean, how long ago it was.
2007.
7.
That was the
Oh,
year my
okay.
first kid was born. Yep.
So
Yeah.
I think season 3 then, because I was
Probably,
already
yeah.
on
Yeah.
private practice.
Anything as you look back on it, and again, this is not a gotcha question, but is there anything that you do differently? I ask partly because Paul and I, as we're rewatching, I feel like I'm watching a different person. I have almost no attachment to this, what a 26-year-old, brand new, barely have ever done TV human being that I'm watching. So not in a sort of actually actor neurotic way, but I look at it and I go, oh, there are certain choices I would make differently now because I've been doing it longer.
Mm.
This obviously wasn't early in your career, but when you think about it and you look back on it, are there things, you mentioned there's certain jokes that you wouldn't be able to tell now and certain things
Yeah.
you couldn't get away with. And by the way, in a minute, we are going to get back to how the hell you got the name Teabag past the network. But
I got a
um,
story for you.
Oh,
yeah,
good.
we've been asking this question of each other.
And
Yeah.
we've been making up. We've
season.
been making up stories about it the whole time about how this happened. But anyway, go on with
Yes.
your questions.
But yeah, I mean, is there anything that you would do
story
differently?
wise or
Yeah,
story
yeah.
wise.
If I could go back and you told me I got to re-experience every second as it played out, I would go back and re-experience every second. When I tell you it was an
That's
across the board, wholesale,
beautiful.
glorious experience. And I
Wow.
go back to the writers. And not only did we become friends and I admired their talent and they helped, we tabled everything. So I, as showrunner, would go in there and I would get notes from them on my script, which oftentimes doesn't happen. Like
That's
you were
cool.
gang. But beyond that, it was the last of those writers' rooms that you could be kind of nakedly emotional and you could volunteer personal stuff and riotously funny. But
Mhm.
people shared shit and people
Mm.
would, and I explained to someone once upon a time that it wasn't directed at people weren't getting ribbed or needled. All the energy went to the center of the room, if you know what I mean. So people were volunteering at the center of the room. So you weren't targeted, but you would also volunteer. Some people would be less so, but the kind of the core tops that Karen and Nick Santora and certainly Zach Estrin,
Yeah.
you really got to know people but also you give people shit. And and that doesn't exist anymore, I think for good reason, because there are certain people who took advantage of that or singled people out or maybe people didn't feel comfortable. So because of that, nowadays, a lot of great work's done. I'm in a writer's room nowadays, and it's as sterile as an operating room. That no one brings up anything because you just don't want to go to HR. You're very careful, but that's just the way it goes. You're here to write and get good material. When I look back on those moves in terms of just like, how did we come up with that? Where did that story come from?
Mhm.
But beyond that, like seeing the talent that was going on in Chicago, then Dallas and Los Angeles, as you know, you've got to clear 5 hurdles to
Yeah.
get a show there. 10 things have to come together and they don't
Mhm.
sometimes. But I look back on that experience and then the writers will communicate in group text. We'll get together and see each other. There'll never be another one like it. Not for me.
Can we go back to Teabag now?
Yeah.
Please.
Let's
I'm just
pivot
saying.
back to Teabag. Okay. So
we have spent so many episodes going, did they not know? And
They
what was
couldn't
the
have-
moment
they
when
couldn't have
somebody
known.
at Fox was like, you guys, I just found out what Teabag means.
Right.
Like, Tell
Well,
us.
I'll give you, so the tea bag is similar to later. So I'll back up first. There's a character later called Avocado Balls Johnson,
Yeah.
who,
Mhm.
I'm saying,
Mhm.
and Paul Schering would kind of, he just kind of threw it out there. Okay, so Avocado Balls Johnson comes in. And so then we're like, well, what do we call him? Well, we already called him in the room Avocado Balls Johnson, but we can't call that. We're like, how do we crack this? So we're like, let's do an avocado and then have a hyphenate last name on the script, BALZ hyphen Johnson, Avocado Balls Johnson. And it went through and they did it, and the Avocados Balls Johnson were like, so that was kind of informed by the
Like
tea bag
Munch's
early in.
carpets?
Okay,
Munch's,
we had a
Munch's
whole
carpets,
discussion
yes.
about why is his name avocado. I don't think we knew. I don't think we heard his last name.
I don't think you
We
get
were
his
like,
last
why
name.
is like
it was avocado, and someone later says, get Balls Johnson down. I can't remember how it was backed up or tucked in, but
Sorry, is that a thing that guys talk about avocado balls? Because
no,
if it is,
it
I'm
was,
learning right
no,
now.
but
Yeah,
now I can't get it out of now I can't get it out of my head. And then now it also not just this, not just the sexual abuse he's heaping on poor Tweener,
Poor
but now the
Tweener.
fact that
Yeah.
Tweener went at his genitals with a straight razor
That's right.
has now I can picture it even more specifically than I was
certainly
picturing it before.
The grass, yes. So
So
early on, we're talking about the teabag character. And again, the nickname comes up, and someone mentions that back then it's a slang term for something that I think fraternities back then might have been somewhat, it's an act that someone does when you get teabagged. So the
don't
name
look it up,
comes
guys.
up.
Don't look
It's
it
like,
up.
Don't Google. Nobody Google that.
I know you didn't want it. And so we're calling him Teabag in the room. Then again, we're like, what's his name? Well, we've been calling him Teabag. And well, we can't get that across. And then we're like, well, let's have his name be the
Theater bag.
entree into the nickname. I can't remember who it was who was like, what about Timothy? And then we toss around Bagwell. Timothy Bagwell, and he goes by Teabag for short. So that's how, because keep in mind when standards and practices, the censors, they don't hear it, they read it. So if you see Timothy Bagwell and then it's like Teabag under that, you can kind of sneak it in a little bit. But that's one of those also, how we got that through, I have no idea. And
It is amazing.
I think
It is amazing.
The moment I keep fixating on is, okay, it goes through and now it's 3 episodes have aired, 5 episodes have aired. And then somebody at Fox goes, oh shit. And then
Dana Walden goes,
and then,
get
yeah,
me Matt
and then
Olmstead.
somebody goes, are you going to tell standards and practices that they missed this? I'm not going to tell them. Are you going to tell them? No, I didn't miss it. And then it's
too late.
Too late.
And I mean, in theory, something similar, but far less raunchy happened with C-Note, right? That he becomes Benjamin Franklin because he's been called C-Note? Or did that start with him being Benjamin Miles Franklin and somebody?
Yeah, that was in the original pilot. I remember Paul had read a couple kind of prison books, the realized,
Yeah.
and there was a character named C-Note in that, and he liked that, and I believe.
Okay.
So then we just kind of designed a name that would support, I believe. But,
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. We do have to go soon, but I do have a couple more questions. Paul, do you have anything else you want to?
I mean, I could go on forever. So Sarah, you hit it and I'll see what comes.
Well, this is, since we're on names, this is itty bitty, but we just watched this episode together, like just now.
Yeah.
And when Michael comes out of the Pope's office, having subdued him and stuck him in the closet, he says to the receptionist, he's on a call with Druschel from the DOC. Is that a name with any significance? Was that somebody's
was
cat?
my assistant, Jeff
There you go.
Druschel. Says, there you go.
There you go. Okay.
There's always a connection.
Always a connection. Because, the one about Seth cracked me up because, of course, we went to the same university. And I was like, oh, my God, they turned this poor kid into a prison bitch. But then gave him a writing career, which is great.
When, do you remember? Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Do you remember, was it, so many of us ended up with our real first names, C.O. Mac, Paul, Danny. It was just a coincidence.
Yeah.
Was that somebody's preference, or was it like a tongue-in-cheek thing that one person came up with that everyone liked? Like, where did it come for?
I can't remember exactly where that came from. I think there was a little bit of convenience, and also might have been in the room, kind of like it stuck. So
Great. I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it.
You're lucky that they didn't have a pet name for you that you wouldn't like. At least, you became Paul and not like
As far as I know.
some awful.
I have no
That's,
idea.
that's true. That's
I
true.
was not in that writer's room.
I now have an answer to your question. Is there anything I do differently? Very early on, when I'm talking to Paul Turing,
Mhm.
and like the tattoos, what happens when he gets out of prison? He's like, it'll always happen. Like, well, he's not planning on being in prison forever. What if we do, later we described that it's like a high level kind of henna that he put in there, but it's going to fade out slowly because he's planning on being out in 2 months. And then we
Interesting.
went away. I look back and like, here we are lasering them off,
Yeah.
which is one of the current
Totally.
plot points in the show. I'm like,
Mhm.
should have done the goddamn
Mhm.
henna. We should
Because
have
they
done
were
it.
5 hours on to
Come on.
put those tattoos on. That was brutal.
From a production standpoint, it became a nightmare.
Yeah, no, I could
when
see
they were
that.
there. Yeah.
For sure. Getting sleeved up. But dealing with that stuff, funny, once upon a time, I read a quote on a tea bag. Carve your successes in stone, write your failures in the sand.
Ooh.
And I look
like
back and I
that.
remember some things. I'm like, I'd forgotten about that because I wrote all that shit in the sand. I only
That's
remember
beautiful.
the shit that I carve in stone, which is you guys, the staff, the accomplishment and the whole experience, getting out of a marriage that wasn't working out and meeting the love of my life. These are all things I've carved in the sand, or rather carved in stone on
It's
Prison Break.
amazing.
I'm gonna I might get that tattooed. Carve your successes in stone, write your failures in sand. That's
It's really
bloody
excellent.
beautiful.
And
That's a great
certainly-
place to
And
stop.
great advice I could take. We're going to take a very quick break, and then we're going to wrap up, but also we have some fan questions from Instagram for Matt. So we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We have a few questions from fans who wrote in on @PrisonBreak podcast on Instagram. Simon Podcasts asks, was it always known from early on that Michael and Link would be revealed as half-brothers?
It's funny, when I came on the show, it's one of my first questions to Paul Turing. Like, why do they have different last names? He's like, I don't know. It's so different. Like, people are going to ask.
Yeah.
But I'm like, okay.
I love a writer that doesn't have I love a writer's like, because it's cool. And then somebody else has to figure it out.
That was exactly right.
But also, if they had the same name, they would never be put in the same prison.
There you go. So it was same dad, different moms. The dad was out, the mom's out. Well, we figured it out. But that was addressed very early on.
Yeah.
To that.
@Caitlin_XM asks, is there a favorite line you can remember writing yourself coming out of your fingertips for Prison Break that you would be like, did you write "We're not breaking out of a Jamba Juice, gentlemen," which is
That is my
Sarah's
all-time favorite line
line?
from the show.
That
might be Zach.
That's Zach.
That's Zach. We're
That's
not breaking
Zach.
out of a Jamba Juice, gentlemen.
Okay,
Yeah.
so is there a favorite line that you remember Matt Olmstead?
I
writing?
don't. I remember other lines from other writers who I was, enamored by. That
Can you
being
give
one of them.
us? Can you give us a few written in stone lines that, if you just say someone says Prison Break favorite lines to you, is there anything that pops out to you? And if not, that's okay too.
Yeah, I can't think of any. There's a couple of Teabags lines I didn't want to say out loud.
Yeah.
But
I know.
I will say that his introductory scene in the bleachers, where you first see him, written by Paul Turing, again, it's one of those scenes where like you could not do that nowadays, but also at the same time, you're like, this is real prison shit.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So this goes on, but I was like listening to a couple of the things that he says to try and woo Michael, and this animus is directed towards that, the black prisoners who are working out across the way. I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
I forgot, like, he went for it. So I don't admire
He
the
went
lines
for it.
because they make me happy. I admire, like, the fact that there was a kind of a bravery it took to, like, they're going to talk like prisoners talk.
Mhm. Oh, we do have to wrap it up there, but we want to thank everyone for listening. And here's the call-in question of the week, Matt. We have a call-in line. 4013-P-break is our telephone
Just the letter
number.
P.
Yeah, just the letter P. 4013-P-break. Should we do last meals, Sarah? Should we just
Yeah,
ask
we'll do that.
people? Call in and say, what would your,
Um,
if you were on death row, what would your last meal be? And
Oh,
Matt, that's
a
one
nice
of
one.
our wrap-up questions
Yeah.
for you.
So that's
Matt,
we've got a couple of wrap-up questions we do for our guests here. If you would be good enough to answer them. So if you were on death row, what would your last meal be?
I've recently entertained this, talked to my daughters about the last meal. I would go for a seafood platter, but
Oh,
I'm talking tiered.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, little plate of spaghetti,
Okay.
cold beer, and I would finish with a good chocolate chip cookie, and I'm good.
Outstanding.
Fantastic
Um,
answer. Well thought
okay.
out.
Yeah.
So then our last question is just a fill in the blank. We've answered this ourselves. All of our guests have answered it. Feel free to take your time. You're a writer. There's no pressure, but it should be brilliant. Don't get sent to prison, but if you do go to prison, blank. I'll give you that again. Don't get sent to prison. But if you do go to prison, and this came from Paul, who had heard somebody once say, don't get sent to prison, but if you do go to prison, quickly establish dominance.
Mhm. Don't go to prison.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But if you do go to prison,
Mhm.
do what you can through your attorney, public defender,
Mhm.
based on your own criminal background, hopefully it's minimal,
Mhm.
to get sent to a prison like Joliet Prison, where they sent the kind of minimal risk, kind of old head prisoners, which was evidenced by the topiary and there'd be bonsai trees, and people were there just to do their time. You don't want to go to the modern pod style prison like
Mhm.
Stateville, nearby to Joliet, where good luck. If you can get yourself to the minimal risk prison, you're going to be a lot.
This is maybe the most practical answer we've gotten.
Yeah.
That is really, really great.
Fully fleshed out, as you would expect from a showrunner.
I have one of my favorite lines.
Oh.
Like, can I share the line
Yes.
real
What's your favorite line?
the original finale where Michael is dead and it's showing all the characters of where they are before you go to the headstone.
This is season 4.
Season 4.
Okay.
And you see the quote that he had established at the very beginning, be the change you want to see in the world. It was a great book and payoff. And we see your character with the boy, with his son in the market. And I remember screening that in the writer's room. We screened every cut together. We gave notes together as been established. We're all in tears. And the scene where Paul's character has been elected to office, he's walking out,
Oh.
and the widow of the former Danny's widow, you remember me, and you say he was a great hero, American hero, and then she spits in your face and you get in the car. And I remember texting with you a couple times on this because the editor, when your character got in the limo, cranked it down, and I found a song that played over it. This I can't remember what the name of the song was, but it really kind of fit. And right when the song turned, he cranked it down and a flashbulb kind of illuminated you. And I was just like, this is a magical ending of all the characters culminating in this kind of confluence of energy where they're all going to pay off as they walk off the beach. Now, we came back in another season, the whole thing. But at that time,
That was the end of the
it
show.
was so cathartic and such a payoff and so rewarding. But the idea of your character fraudulently as a politician, yes, of course, Danny was American hero and he gets spit in the face, which was kind of like prison breaking body. That line comes to mind.
That's cool.
That was so fun to shoot, and it was great.
I remember real quick. It was written, she spits on your shoes. I'm like, I can't write that she's going to spit in your face. You are set. Have her spit in my face. I'm like, go right ahead.
Yep.
I'm like,
Yep.
I love it.
Absolutely.
So good.
God, I forgot about that.
I remember
That's
that
cool.
exchange too. I remember the whole email exchange about where do you think he would be? It was so, and I think it's the Sarah's thing about where do you think Kellerman would be now? We're thinking this, we're thinking that. Do you have any thoughts? It was just so welcoming and organic. It was really cool. Matt, thank you. Thank you so much. This has been just wonderful.
Thank you.
This is good fun. This is good for my heart.
God. I'm glad to be doing this. I'm glad that you guys fondly remember it. I didn't know if we were alone, the writers were alone, but I was like, you only get so many golden gigs. You really do. If you're lucky enough, you all are to kind of put out a career, that itself is a huge victory. but you only get so many golden gigs, and Prison Break across the board was as gold as it gets.
Prison Breaking with Sarah and Paul is a Caliber Studio production. Your hosts have been friends, but not besties, Sarah Wayne Callies and Paul Adelstein. Our prison warden has been producer Ben Haber. Our head of Jailhouse Rock is Paul Adelstein, who made the music for this podcast. Keeping us slim and trim in the prison yard has been sound designer and editor, the great Jeff Schmidt. Keeping us up to date on the outside world is production assistant Drew Austin. Our prison artist, logo, and brand designer is John Dinciato and Little Big Brands. Check them out at www.littlebigBrands.com. Follow us on Instagram at Prison Break Podcast. Email us at prisonbreaking@caliber-studio.com and call us at 401-3-PBREAK. Prison Breaking with Sarah and Paul has been a Caliber Studio production. Thank you for listening.